The moment he dropped to one knee, not in front of his bride, but in front of the woman sitting quietly in the very last row, every single person in that ballroom stopped breathing. The champagne glasses went still. The string quartet cut off mid-note. And Dominique, standing at the front of the room in a $40,000 couture gown, her fresh locks pinned up like a crown, her acrylic nails curled around a bouquet of blush peonies. She watched the man she was about to marry turn his back on her, in front of 230 guests, in front of her mother, in front of God. Nobody saw it coming, and that's what made it the most devastating, most electric, most jaw-dropping moment any of them had ever witnessed at a wedding. But to understand why Marcus did what he did, you have to go back, way back, before the venue deposit. Before the engagement ring that Dominique's mother, Renee, had been photographed wearing at her book club 3 different times, just to show the ladies. Before any of this, you have to go back to the woman in the last row, the one nobody noticed, the one they made sure nobody noticed. Her name was Celestine, and she had been there the whole time. Before we get into this, I just want to say, drop your city in the comments right now. I love knowing where y'all are tuning in from. Whether you're watching from Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, London, Lagos, wherever you are, drop it down below. And listen, after you hear what was done to this woman in today's story, I genuinely want to know, what would you have done if you were in her shoes? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have spoken up? Because I am going to tell you right now, what Renee and Dominique did was the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop. Drop your city and your reaction in the comments. And if you are new here, please subscribe. Hit that bell. Because the stories we tell on this channel, they are not the ones you hear anywhere else. All right, let's go back in. Marcus Beaumont was 34 years old, self-made, and completely in love. He had grown up in the west side of Memphis, not the part they put on postcards. The part where if your lights got cut off in December, you layered up and kept it moving. His mother, Celestine Beaumont, had raised him on 2 jobs, dried beans, and an absolutely unbreakable sense of dignity. She cleaned office buildings at night and worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic during the day. She never complained. She never asked for anything from anybody. She wore her work uniform with the same straightness in her spine as if it were a gown. Marcus watched her do that for 18 years, and it wired something into him that no business school, no mentor, no motivational speech ever could. He worked. He sacrificed. He built. By 30, he owned a logistics company that serviced 3 regional hospital networks and 2 federal contracts. By 32, he had a portfolio that his accountant described, and these were the accountant's actual words, as generational. Not rich for right now rich, generational, the kind of wealth where your grandchildren's grandchildren feel it. He didn't talk about it loudly. That was important. He drove a clean but modest car, lived in a nice but not ostentatious home in a quiet suburb outside of Nashville, and kept his circle tight, real tight. His mother knew everything. His childhood best friend Dre knew most of it, and that was about it. Because here is the thing about Marcus that people who only knew his bank account never understood. He was not defined by the money. He was defined by what happened before the money. By every winter morning, he watched his mother iron her uniform in the dark before a 5 a.m. shift. By the years, they ate rice and butter 4 nights a week because it was what stretched. By the way, she would hum while she did it. Not sad humming, not defeated humming. Steady, purposeful humming, like a woman who had decided that gratitude was not a feeling, but a practice. He held on to all of that. He carried it into every boardroom, every negotiation, every signed contract. Those memories were not baggage. They were fuel. Anna, they were the reason he never took a shortcut, never cut a corner, never once forgot where he came from. His accountant could call it generational. Marcus called it something simpler. He called it his mother's work finally getting its return. That's the context you need. Because when you understand what Celestine meant to him, not just as his mother, but as the living proof that dignity is possible without resources, that grace doesn't cost money, that a person can be bone-tired and still go in every single day with their head up, you understand why what happened at that wedding didn't just embarrass him. It broke something. and some things, once broken, reorganize into a completely different shape, which is exactly how Dominique Reeves found him. Or more precisely, how her mother, Renee Reeves, found him first. Now, Renee Reeves was the kind of woman who researched people the way most people research vacations. Thorough, meticulous, with a clear goal in mind. She had been a real estate agent for 20 years, which meant she had an eye for value, an instinct for what was underpriced, and absolutely no patience for anything she deemed beneath her standard. She drove a high-end luxury SUV, wore her hair in a precise bob that never moved, and considered herself, without irony, a woman of exceptional taste. Her daughter Dominique was beautiful, genuinely, strikingly beautiful. She had the kind of face that made rooms quiet when she walked in, and she'd grown up knowing it. Renee had made sure of that. From pageants at age 7 to modeling at 16, Dominique had been groomed to understand that her looks were currency. And Renee, the accountant of that currency, had been waiting patiently for the right investment opportunity. They met Marcus at a charity gala that Renee had essentially worked her way into by volunteering to organize the silent auction table. She didn't even like the charity. She liked the donor list, and Marcus Beaumont was on it, tagged as a mid-level donor. What Renee did not know, because Marcus kept things quiet, was that the mid-level tag was a deliberate choice on his part. He didn't like attention. She introduced Dominique to him that night. Dominique was charming and warm, and genuinely, Marcus felt something. That part was real. They talked for 2 hours at the gala, then texted until 2 a.m. They dated for 8 months before things got serious. And in those 8 months, Marcus was careful. He took his time. Now, he watched how she moved through the world. What he didn't watch closely enough was how she talked about other people when she thought nobody was paying attention. The first time he brought Dominique to Memphis to meet his mother, the visit lasted 4 hours. Celestine had cooked smothered chicken, dirty rice, cornbread, sweet tea. She had cleaned the house until it glowed. She put out her nice tablecloth. She was nervous in the best way, because this was her son, and he was happy, and that was everything to her. Dominique ate 2 bites and asked if there was anything lighter. She spent most of the dinner on her phone. And on the drive back to the hotel, Marcus's car hadn't even fully left the neighborhood. She said, "Your mom is sweet. Kind of a lot though, right? Like a lot of questions." Marcus heard it. Well, he just didn't know what to do with it yet. Then there was the conversation she had with her mother on the phone, a conversation she didn't know Marcus partially overheard, where she described Celestine as a lot to deal with, and very much a whole situation. She said it breezy, like it was just facts, like his mother was a logistical inconvenience rather than a human being. He let it sit. He told himself it was first meeting nerves. People said awkward things. He loved Dominique. He believed she had more in her than that. Renee, on the other hand, did not bother hiding her opinion. Once the relationship became serious and the talk of marriage came up, Renee began what Marcus could only describe later as a quiet campaign to minimize Celestine. It was never loud. It was never one big moment. It was small, constant, and surgical. And at the engagement party that Renee threw, without asking Marcus for input on the guest list, Celestine was assigned a seat at the back corner table near the kitchen. When Marcus noticed and tried to move her, Renee appeared from nowhere with a warm smile and said, "Oh, Marcus, baby, we set up the family tables in a specific flow. If we move one person, the whole arrangement falls apart. Celestine, you understand, don't you, sweetheart?" And Celestine, who was grace itself, nodded and said she was fine. She was not fine, but she said she was, because that's who she was. The wedding planning process, 8 months of it, was essentially a systematic operation to make Celestine Beaumont feel invisible. She was not consulted on the venue. She was not in the wedding party, even though Marcus had asked Dominique 3 separate times about including her in some capacity. Every time Dominique would say something like, "I just want the aesthetic to be clean, babe. We can do something special for her at the rehearsal dinner." The rehearsal dinner came and went. Nothing special happened. When the invitations went out, Celestine received a standard envelope. Not a handwritten note from the couple, a standard envelope. The same one the groom's co-workers received. When the seating chart was finalized, in which Renee handled entirely, Celestine Beaumont, the mother of the groom, was seated at table 17. Last row, against the back wall, half behind a decorative floral installation that blocked the view of the main event entirely. She would not be able to see her son get married from that seat. Marcus did not know about the seating chart until the day of the wedding. Renee had handled it. Dominique had trusted her mom on the logistics. And by the time the day arrived, there was so much noise, so much motion, so many people and cameras and opinions and schedules that the seating chart seemed like a detail too small to pull apart. But when Marcus walked into the venue for the ceremony run through that morning and asked the coordinator where his mother's seat was, and she led him through the room, all the way to the back, all the way to table 17, half hidden behind a wall of white roses, something in him went very, very still. He didn't explode. He didn't make a scene. He just stood there for about 45 seconds, staring at that chair, and then he walked back out of the room. He called Dre. "So now you see what they did?" Dre was quiet for a second. Then, "Yeah, man, I saw it when I came in. She's behind the floral thing. She can't even see the altar from there." Another pause. "I know." Marcus said nothing for a while. Then, "Dre, my mother worked 2 jobs until I was 18 years old so that I could eat. She wore uniforms with holes in the soles and still went in with her head up every single day, and they sat her in the back." Dre said, "What are you going to do?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I'm going to let the day happen," he said finally. "I'm going to let it all happen exactly the way they planned it. Every bit of it." That was all he said. And Dre, who had known Marcus since 3rd grade, heard everything in those words that wasn't spoken out loud. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock. 230 guests, a live quartet, aisle runners in champagne and ivory, floral arrangements that cost more per table than Celestine's monthly take-home pay. Dominique walked in on her father's arm, looking like a dream. She was stunning. There was no denying it. The room exhaled in that collective, reverent way that happens when a bride crosses a threshold. And in the very last row, in the seat they'd stuck her in, Celestine Beaumont sat in her good dress, a deep plum, long-sleeve dress that she had ordered special from a boutique in Memphis 4 months ago. And she watched her son through a gap in the white roses. She smiled the whole time. She did not cry. She just watched him with that specific look that mothers carry. Equal parts pride and love and something that has no word for it in English. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody sat next to her. The people at her table were distant relatives of distant relatives. People who had only received an invitation out of obligation. They greeted each other, but not her. She was completely, deliberately alone. The vows came and went. Dominique's vows were beautiful. Professionally written, it turned out later, by a vows writing service she had found online. They were lyrical and polished, and they made several women in the audience cry. Marcus's vows were written by Marcus in a hotel room the night before on a napkin. They were shorter. They were real. And when he finished them, his voice cracked once, just once, on the word safe. As in, I want you to always feel safe with me. The reception was in the same venue, 1 floor up in the grand ballroom. Oh, the kind of space that makes you feel like you've walked into real money. Soaring ceilings, chandeliers dripping in amber light, round tables draped in floor-length ivory linen. Place settings that probably cost $40 apiece. The room was breathtaking, and Renee, standing near the entrance greeting guests with the proprietary energy of a hostess at her own party, was in her element entirely. Celestine found her table again. Table 17, still tucked against the back wall. Someone had moved the floral installation slightly. She could now see more of the room, though the head table was still partially obscured. She sat down, smoothed her dress, and accepted a glass of water from a server who didn't make eye contact. The cocktail hour was 1 hour of watching other people. The toast began. Renee's toast was 12 minutes long. It was not about Marcus and Dominique so much as it was about Renee, her sacrifices, her vision, how she had raised Dominique to know her worth. She mentioned Marcus twice, both times by referencing how he had risen to meet the standard her daughter deserved. The room applauded. Marcus smiled. His eyes told a different story. Dominique's maid of honor, her cousin Tasha, gave a toast that was actually funny and warm. She made people cry and laugh in the same 30 seconds. Marcus appreciated that. It felt real. Then it was time for the groom's toast. This was the moment. This was what Marcus had been building towards since that morning when he stood in front of table 17 in the empty ballroom and let the silence tell him what he needed to know. The MC handed him the microphone. Marcus stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked out at the room. 230 people, his wife's family in the front and center, his own side of the family, scattered, fewer, quieter, distributed throughout, and all the way in the back, half visible, his mother in her plum dress. He started talking, calmly. He thanked the venue, the vendors, the guests for coming. He said kind things about Dominique's father, who had flown in from Houston and seemed genuinely decent. He thanked the wedding party. Standard stuff, smooth. People were nodding, comfortable, expecting the usual. Then he said, "Before I close out, I need to do something." He set the microphone down on the table. And then, to the confusion of every single person in that ballroom, he began walking, not toward the head table, not toward his bride, not toward the bar. He walked through the ballroom, past table 5, table 8, table 11, past the place where the servers were stationed, past the ice sculpture that nobody was looking at anymore, because they were all watching Marcus Beaumont walk in a straight, deliberate line toward the back of the room. Toward table 17, you could feel the shift, that specific electricity that only happens when a room realizes, simultaneously, that something is about to happen that cannot be undone. Dominique turned in her seat. Renee stood up from table 2, her chair scraping back, and said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Marcus, baby, the mic, you left the..." And then she stopped. Because she saw where he was going. He reached the back of the room. He reached table 17. He reached his mother, who was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching him approach with an expression that was equal parts confusion and something that looked like a child about to cry. And Marcus Beaumont, CEO, federal contractor, man who had built something from absolutely nothing, got down on one knee in front of his mother's chair, took her hand in both of his, and said, in a voice that he didn't need a microphone for because the entire room had gone completely silent, "Your Grace, I need everyone in this room to see you." Celestine's mouth opened. No sound came out. He continued, and his voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "This woman right here, my mother, worked 2 jobs for 18 years so I could have food, clothes, and a future. She wore the same shoes to work for 3 years because she was saving for my school supplies. She never complained. She never asked for anything. She never put herself first a single day in her life." He paused. He looked around at the room. The whole room slowly, making sure every face met his. And tonight, she was put in the back, out of sight, behind flowers, at a table where she couldn't see her own son get married. The silence in that room was absolute, the kind of silence you feel in your chest. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know how the seating chart happened," he said. "I'm not going to pretend that tonight is the first time this has happened. I have watched for the past 8 months the woman who sacrificed everything for me be made to feel like she is less than, like she doesn't belong in the room, like she is a problem to be managed." He squeezed his mother's hand. "She is not a problem. She is the reason there is a room." Celestine made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her free hand came up to her mouth. "So," Marcus said, and he stood up, still holding her hand. "I need you to stand up, Mama, right now." She stood. He walked her, slowly, deliberately, the whole length of that ballroom, to the head table, to the seat directly to his left, which happened to be the seat that had been assigned to Renee. He pulled it out. He waited for his mother to sit. Then he pushed it in, gentle and careful, and stood behind her for a moment with both hands on her shoulders. Then he looked at the room and said simply, "That's where she sits tonight." Let us be very clear about what happened next, because it happened in layers. Layer 1 was the audience. 230 people had just watched something they would be talking about for the rest of their lives. Some of them were already crying. Some of them were sitting perfectly still with their hands over their mouths. Dre, at table 6, was nodding with his eyes closed like a man at church. Dominique's father, at table 3, was looking at the tablecloth. One of the servers near the kitchen door had stopped mid-step, her tray balanced in her hands, eyes fixed on the head table. Even the bartender had gone still, because the thing about a moment like that, a real moment, an unrepeatable one, is that it touches something that lives in everyone. Every person in that room had a mother, or had lost one, or wished they'd done more for one. Every person in that room had either been put in a back row or watched someone else get put there and said nothing. And Marcus, without planning it to land this way, had made the moment about all of them at once. Layer 2 was Dominique. She had not moved. She was still at the head table, in her $40,000 gown, and her face had gone through approximately 7 different emotions in the span of 90 seconds. Confusion, embarrassment, fury, something that might have been shame, and then, settling over all of it like a lid on a pot, a cold and controlled blankness. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She was not going to cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. Layer 3 was Renee. Renee Reeves had been standing since Marcus started walking. And now, as she watched her daughter's new husband place his mother in what had been her chair, at the head table, at the celebration that she had planned, that she had spent 8 months orchestrating, something moved across her face that was not graceful. It was the face of a woman who has realized, too late, that she miscalculated. She walked to the head table. She stopped about 3 feet from Marcus, and she lowered her voice to a hiss, which in that silent room was essentially a regular volume. "Marcus, this is not the time." He looked at her. "You're right," he said. "The time was 8 months ago, but we're here now. You are embarrassing your wife on her wedding day. I'm honoring my mother on my wedding day. There's a difference." Renee straightened. Her voice went lower, harder. "So you need to think very carefully about what you're doing right now." Marcus looked at her for a long, unbroken moment. "I have been thinking carefully," he said. "I've been thinking carefully since 7 a.m. this morning when I walked into this room and found my mother's seat." He picked up the microphone from the table. "I thought carefully, and this is what I decided." He looked at Dominique, and what he said next was the thing that nobody in that room expected. "Dominique." His voice was soft, not angry, sad actually, the kind of sad that lives deep. "I love you. I meant everything I said in those vows. Every word." He paused. "But I need to know, right now in front of everybody, did you know about the seating chart?" The room held its breath so hard you could feel the pressure change. Dominique's jaw tightened. She said nothing for 3, 4, 5 seconds. And then, and this was the thing that changed everything. She said, "Marcus, my mother handled the logistics. I trusted her. I didn't know every detail." It was almost true. The problem was the pause. The problem was the 5 seconds before it. The problem was that 2 people at table 7, Dominique's own cousins, looked at each other with an expression that was very, very easy to read. Marcus saw it. He didn't say anything about it. He just nodded slowly. The way a person nods when they've received information they already had but needed confirmed. "Okay," he said. That was all. Just, "Okay." He set the microphone down. He sat next to his mother. And the wedding reception, the $40,000, 230 guests, Axe String Quartet and Champagne Tower reception continued. Because what else do you do? The food came out. The music came back up, tentative at first, then louder. People began talking again in the way they do when they need to process something and don't know where to start. Celestine sat at the head table and ate her meal. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She held her son's hand under the table for the first 20 minutes, and that was the whole conversation. Renee did not return to the head table. She sat at table 2 for the rest of the night, and the bob did not move, and the smile did not waver, and she talked loudly and warmly to everyone around her, as though nothing had happened. She was performing. She was very good at it. But her eyes, every few minutes, Mike cut to the head table and to the empty chair where she was supposed to be sitting. Dominique danced. She laughed. She toasted with her bridesmaids. She was doing the same performance as her mother, just in couture. From the outside, she looked like a woman having the time of her life. But Tasha, the maid of honor, the one who had given the real, funny, warm toast, found Marcus alone near the bar at around 9 o'clock. You already knew she knew, Tasha said. She didn't make it a question. Marcus took a sip of his drink. Yeah. How? Dominique called me 2 weeks ago asking if I would be upset if she mixed up the family seating a little bit for a better aesthetic flow. I told her my mother needed to be visible. She said, of course, then the chart came out the way it came out. He set down the glass. So yeah, she knew. Tasha was quiet. Then, Marcus, what happens now? He was quiet for a long time. The music was playing somewhere behind them. His mother was at the head table, talking to Dre, laughing at something. She looked like herself finally. She looked comfortable. I don't know yet, he said, but something changes tonight, one way or another. The morning after the wedding, Marcus and Dominique did not go on a honeymoon. The honeymoon had been scheduled, 14 days in the Maldives, a private villa resort that Marcus had paid for in full 6 months prior. The bags were packed. The car to the airport was booked for 8 a.m., but at 6:45 that morning, Marcus sat at the edge of the hotel bed with his suitcase between his feet and made a phone call to a number he had in his phone but had never used before. His attorney. Well, not a wedding attorney. The kind of attorney who handles different kinds of endings. He didn't file anything. He didn't make any irreversible moves. He just called and he asked questions. And when the call was done, he sat there for another 20 minutes, very still, in the early morning quiet while Dominique slept. When she woke up, they had a conversation. The real one. The one that couldn't happen in a ballroom in front of 230 guests. Dominique sat up in bed and looked at him and said, Are we going to talk about last night? Yeah, he said. We are. She crossed her arms. You humiliated me on my wedding day. I honored my mother on my wedding day. You made a scene in front of every person we know. Your mother put mine in the back row behind a wall of flowers. I moved her to the front. Yar, that's the whole story. Dominique's eyes flashed. My mother planned that wedding for 8 months. 8 months. And you stood up in front of everybody and made her look like a villain. Did I? Marcus said. He was very, very calm. The kind of calm that comes after a decision has already been made. Or did she make herself look like one by making the choice she made? You don't know what went into that. Dom. He looked at her. I know you knew. Silence. Tasha didn't tell me, he said before she could assume. I figured it out myself. But you knew. You told me 2 weeks ago that you were thinking about mixing up the seating for the aesthetic, and I told you my mother needed to be visible. You said okay. And then the chart came out the way it came out. Dominique looked away. She looked at the window. She looked at her hands. Ewen, I trusted my mother's judgment, she said quietly. That's the part that gets me, Marcus said. Not that there was a mistake. Mistakes happen. It's that every single time over these past 8 months, when I said something about how my mother was being treated, you said you'd handle it, and nothing changed. Every time she got pushed to the side, you let it happen. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, because she was convenient to ignore. That's not fair. She wore a special dress, Dominique. She ordered it 4 months ago. She told me on the phone. She was so proud of that dress, and they put her behind a flower wall in it. His voice didn't rise. It just got very precise, like he was reading from a document. She sat alone for 3 hours. Nobody went to check on her. Not you, not your mother. And not one person from your side of the family. He paused. My mother is the reason I am the man you married, and you all put her in the back like she was staff. Dominique said nothing. Her jaw was working, but the words weren't coming. He stood up. He picked up the keys to the airport car. I'm going to go see my mother. She's still at the hotel here. I want to have breakfast with her before she flies back home. Marcus, the Maldives flight is at 8. I know. The way he said it made her very quiet. He didn't miss the flight to be cruel. He missed it because, for the first time in a very long time, something was more important than managing the peace. He sat with his mother at a corner table in the hotel restaurant, and she had eggs and fruit and good coffee, and they talked for 2 hours. They talked about Memphis. They talked about the year the heat went out in January and they slept in the kitchen by the stove. They talked about the day she drove him to his first real office space, a rented desk in a shared workspace, and how she'd sat in the car afterward and called her sister and cried because she was so proud she couldn't contain it. She didn't bring up the wedding on her own. After a while, he brought it up. "Mama, I'm sorry about last night." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You went through something you shouldn't have had to go through." She set the cup down. "Marcus, I have been through things." She said it simply, without drama. "I know who I am. I don't need a seat at the front to know my worth." But she paused, and her voice did something small and complicated. "And when you walked to the back and got on your knee?" She shook her head. She pressed her lips together. "I have never felt so seen in all my life." He had to look at the window for a second. "I just needed you to see her," he said. "All of them. I needed them to see you." "They saw me," she said, and she smiled. And that was the thing about Celestine. Even after everything, the smile was real. Now here is where the karma side of this sort of story gets layered. Because karma, when it comes, rarely arrives in one clean strike. It comes in multiple directions at once. And what looked like a win turns out to be a debt that keeps compounding. Renee had spent 8 months crafting a version of this family where Celestine was background noise. And in doing so, she had made several very specific calculations. She had calculated that Marcus loved Dominique enough to absorb any friction. She had calculated that Celestine was quiet enough to stay quiet. She had calculated that the financial security Marcus represented, the generational wealth kind, the kind that sets up bloodlines, was enough to hold the structure together regardless of what happened around the edges. What Renee did not calculate was Dr. because Dre had not only been Marcus's best friend since 3rd grade. Dre was also a journalist. Not a famous one, not television. He ran a mid-sized culture and lifestyle digital platform that had about 340,000 highly engaged subscribers. And Dre had been at the wedding. Dre had watched the whole night. And Dre, who loved Marcus like a brother and Celestine like an aunt, had his phone out. He didn't post anything immediately, when he sat on it for 9 days. But on the 10th day, he published a piece. No names, no identifying details that weren't already public knowledge. Just a first-person account of what it's like to watch your friend navigate a family dynamic that uses love as currency and decides who deserves to feel it based on status. He talked about the woman in the last row. He talked about the man who walked the length of the room to get her. He talked about what dignity looks like when it has nowhere to sit and what it looks like when it finally gets its seat. He didn't need to name anyone. The story was specific enough to be real and broad enough to belong to everyone who had ever been treated like they were too plain, too simple, too worn to sit at the front. It got 2.2 million views in 4 days. It landed on 3 major platforms, picked up by content creators and lifestyle writers and family dynamics accounts across every corner of the internet. It became the kind of story that women posted in their group chats with no caption because no caption was needed. Nobody knew it was Marcus. Nobody knew it was Dominique or Renee, but Renee knew, and Dominique knew. And when Renee called Dre's platform line to demand a retraction, Dre replied with a single email that said, "Nothing in the piece is false. I don't retract true things." Meanwhile, in the real-world aftermath, Marcus had made his decision. He had not filed for divorce, not yet, but he had done something that in many ways was quieter and more significant. He had moved his mother out of her Memphis apartment and into a house. Not an extravagant estate, not a statement, a safe, beautiful, warm house in a good neighborhood, 10 minutes from a park, with a garden in the back where she could grow things if she wanted to. He put it in her name, completely in her name, and he set up a monthly transfer that meant she would never work 2 jobs again unless she genuinely wanted to. He didn't tell Dominique until after it was done. She found out through a bank statement. She had access to a joint account that Marcus had set up for household expenses, and one of the transfers had briefly passed through a linked account. She called him, sharp and fast. "You bought your mother a house?" "Yes." "With our money?" "With my money." "The joint account wasn't used." A pause. "You didn't discuss this with me." "No," he said, "I didn't." And then, after a beat, "The way the seating chart wasn't discussed with me." The line was quiet for a very long time. "Marcus," she said finally, and the sharpness was gone. What was left underneath it was something more fragile, something that sounded honestly a little frightened. Are we okay? He thought about it. The real thought, not the reassuring one. I want us to be, he said, but I need you to understand that what happened at that wedding, what has been happening for 8 months, that is not something I can just absorb and keep going. My mother is not a complication. She is not a variable. She is not an inconvenience to be moved to the back of the room. His voice was quiet but immovable. I need you to look at her the way I look at her, and I need to know that you actually can. Dominique was silent for a long time. And when she spoke, it was not the defensive voice, not the performance voice, not the voice she used when she was managing him. It was something quieter and less protected. I think I let my mother lead on things I should have led on. And I think I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal because I didn't want it to be. It wasn't a full accounting, but it was the first real sentence she had said in months. The first one that wasn't a position. That's a start, he said. They went to couples counseling, once a week for 6 months. It was uncomfortable and slow, and there were sessions where both of them left frustrated and raw. But they went, every week. There was a session in month 3 where Dominique finally said the things she had been circling for weeks. She said, I grew up being told that presentation was everything. It's that how things look is how things are. And your mother, she doesn't perform. She just is. And I think that scared me, because I didn't know what to do with someone who doesn't perform. The therapist was quiet. Marcus was quiet. And then Dominique said, that's not an excuse. I know that. I'm just trying to explain where it came from. Marcus nodded. It wasn't forgiveness in that moment, but it was understanding. And understanding, the therapist would say later, is often what forgiveness needs to walk in on. There were also sessions where Marcus had to sit with his own part. The times he had seen it coming and chosen smoothness over honesty. The times he had told himself that addressing the issue would cause too much friction and let it slide one more time. He was not passive. He had acted eventually decisively. But he also recognized that decisive action at the 11th hour doesn't fully substitute for the smaller corrections he could have made along the way. He owned that, fully, in the room, out loud, and it mattered. Renee was not in the room. Renee was not consulted, and Marcus had a direct, calm, one-time conversation with her in which he said, pleasantly without volume, that he would not be discussing his marriage with her, that his mother was no longer available for displacement, and that any event going forward would include Celestine in a visible, respected capacity, or Marcus would not attend. Renee began a sentence and Marcus said, I'm not negotiating this, Renee. And that was the end of the conversation. Celestine, for her part, moved into her new house, planted a garden, or started going to a water aerobics class at the community center on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and began what she called, in the dry, understated way that was entirely hers, Phase 2. She never gloated. She never made anyone feel the weight of what had been done to her. She just continued being exactly who she was. That was the most powerful thing of all. The woman they had put in the last row, the woman they had seated in the back and hoped would stay quiet and be grateful for a glass of water from a server who didn't make eye contact. She didn't need the front seat to know she deserved it. She had always known. She had just been waiting with extraordinary patience for the room to figure it out. And eventually, on a Saturday night, in a ballroom full of people who had come for a party and gotten a revelation instead, the room figured it out. There is a specific kind of person that the world tends to underestimate on sight. They don't wear their credentials loudly. They don't carry their sacrifices out in front of them like a shield. They show up. They do the work. They love without demanding that their love be acknowledged. And when the room looks around to figure out who matters, those people are often already in the back corner, folded into themselves, politely invisible because the louder, shinier people took up all the space. But here is what the loud and shiny people never understand. The quiet ones are not invisible because they are small. They are quiet because they have something the room doesn't have the capacity to measure. They have roots. And roots don't need applause. Roots just hold. They hold in drought and in storm, and in every season the tree above them is too busy growing to notice. Celestine Beaumont had held this family together. Not the family she was married into, but the family she built with her own two hands, since before Marcus was old enough to understand what holding meant. And on the night that the room finally saw her, she didn't weep with relief or look around to see who was watching. She just held her son's hand under the table and ate her meal, because she had always known it would get here eventually. She had just been patient enough to wait. Moral lesson. 400 words. Here is what this story is actually about. Not the wedding, not the seating chart, not even the money. And this story is about what happens when you mistake someone's quietness for weakness. Celestine Beaumont never made a scene. She never demanded anything. She accepted the back seat, the corner table, the single serving of acknowledgement, because she was not a woman who confused dignity with loudness. She understood something that the people who arranged that seating chart never did. Your worth is not determined by the chair they give you. It is determined by who you are when nobody is looking, and who Celestine was every single day, in every job, in every sacrifice, in every moment her son was watching without her knowing. That was the foundation the whole story stood on. The real lesson here is about what it costs to treat people as expendable. Renee and Dominique made a calculated decision over and over again that Celestine was not important enough to be seen, and that calculation felt safe because Celestine didn't fight back. Quiet people who don't fight back can look like they've accepted something. They haven't. They've just decided the battle isn't worth their energy. What changes the math is when the people who do fight, the people who love the ones being dismissed, stop absorbing it. Marcus is the story too. Not just because he walked to the back of that room, but because he spent 8 months watching, noting, giving chances, and ultimately choosing his mother's dignity over his own discomfort. There is a kind of love that shows up in the patience before the action, not just the action itself. And for anyone watching this who has been put in a back row, in a family, in a relationship, at a job, anywhere, the truth this story holds for you is simple. The people who put you there are not measuring your value. They are revealing their own. Your value was never up for a vote. The most powerful thing you can do is stay who you are. Keep your back straight. Wear your good dress. Smile in the gap between the flowers. Don't shrink. Don't perform. Don't change the channel of who you are just because someone turned the volume down on you. That is exactly what they want. And that is exactly what you must refuse to give them. Because eventually, and it might not be today, and it might not be at a wedding, but eventually, someone who loves you is going to walk the whole length of the room to get you. And when they do, the whole room will see exactly who always deserved to be at the front.